Tennis has its rules and regulations for everything from audible obscenities to the size of sponsor patches. But there are no fines and no rules and no playbook for the offenses of appalling tweets or holding views offensive to many. In Melbourne, Tennys Sandgren, ranked in the 90s, made an unlikely run to the second week, beating class players in the process.
Does it in style. Tennys Sandgren.
As his profile grew, his social media profile was explored. And it reveals, at a minimum, associations most people find questionable. Sandgren himself, it seems, is no exception. In the middle of a Grand Slam, he took it upon himself to scrub his social media profile clean. Sandgren has been asked about this repeatedly.
I just wondered if you were concerned about having yourself connected to some of these controversial figures.
I mean, no, I'm not concerned about it.
To some, his answers have been satisfactory.
Do you feel that you support some of the alt-right movement?
I don't. No, I don't. I find some of the content interesting, but no, I don't. Not at all.
To others, they've triggered more questions. And so it is that a story about tennis and tennis has become a story about so much more. Ultimately, this traces the same path as the debate about Margaret Court and her views on homosexuality. Is Sandgren, like Margaret Court, entitled to his opinions? Absolutely. Is Sandgren, like Court, immune from the consequences and the blowback? Absolutely not.
With a handful of follows and some likes on Twitter, my fate has been sealed in your minds. To create sensationalist coverage, there are few lengths you wouldn't go to mark me as the man you desperately want me to be.
To a few, it's unfortunate that Sandgren's unlikely story has now been obscured by this political firestorm. To others, whatever Sandgren accomplishes on the court, he'll still be best known for tweets like this one. If nothing else, it's a vivid demonstration of this modern-day reality. At some level, you are what you tweet. As a wise man once said, dance like you mean it. Tweet like it will be read aloud one day.
And John joins us now from Connecticut. And let's start with the tennis side of the Sandgren story, because it's a good one. A player who gets ravaged by injury early in his career, then makes his tour debut at age 25 and makes this improbable run to a Grand Slam quarterfinal. John, in a vacuum, it's hard not to root for a story like that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And people forget that, a few weeks before Tennys Sandgren became this international figure, the source of controversy of the Australian Open, he was playing small events in Champaign-Urbana and in Knoxville, Tennessee. He was barely inside the top 100 when the Australian Open started in 2018. Beat Stan Wawrinka, who was injured a bit, beat Dominic Thiem. This should have been one of the great American tennis breakthroughs. And the bad news is it was overshadowed. The good news, we'll jump ahead and play spoiler and say in the last 2 years, we've come a long way, and we've gotten to know Tennys Sandgren a little bit better. But yeah, at the time, it was a remarkable tennis story that soon got eclipsed by the social media component.
And you're right, John. One of the things that was most impressive during this run for tennis was his ability to kind of jump from challenger player to tour player, and to do it down in Australia, 3 out of 5 sets in a very challenging atmosphere, with incredible amount of heat, incredible amount of adversity, to watch him get past Stan, who was a little hobbled, and then, as mentioned earlier, to get past Dominic Thiem in an amazing 5-set match was really impressive, and kind of a situation where tennis really first started to believe about what he could do on a tennis court. And the downside is the social media part of it, and this is one of the things I loathe about social media, not as much as our good friend Mary Carrillo, who deems it anti-social media. But you just have to be so careful about everything you say. We have learned a lot about tennis since then. He's a bright kid. He has a very different perspective than some of his tweets that were sent out. I think he's a big thinker. But I also think he learned a lot. So this was a challenging time for him, but also a great time for his tennis.
So obviously, in terms of the controversy, like it or not, one of the costs of being a public figure nowadays is that someone's going to do a forensic look at your social media history. I guess, John, my question is in two parts. A, is that fair? And B, how did Sandgren handle it in your mind?
I think he was shell-shocked. I mean, sometimes we see this where people that have a breakthrough, whether it's tennis, whether it's the NFL draft, whether it's outside of sports, and they realize that there are elements of their past that might be uncovered. They're probably prepared to deal with that. I think he was completely blindsided. He said, look, I was a knucklehead kid. I put a few likes that I now regret. In other cases, look, just because I go on someone's page, just because I follow someone doesn't mean I subscribe to their views. I'm trying to educate myself. And I think that he's, as Paul mentioned, I mean, he's also contending with getting to the second week of a major for the first time in his career, and then having to deal with this. It was a lot. I mean, again, I do think we shouldn't, we shouldn't neglect the fact there is a happy ending here. I think a lot of lessons were learned. And to your question, Brett, I think it's fair that we uncover someone's written record, but I also think we need to gauge ourselves and measure ourselves. And if somebody happens to follow someone we find objectionable, that doesn't mean they necessarily subscribe to those views. And I think that's what Tennys Sandgren, you could even see in that clip we showed, I think that's what he really took offense to. He felt he was being put in a box by, listen, I can read publications, I can read books and not agree with the author, and I shouldn't have to apologize for that.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the situation with social media, and that's unfortunately what happens. There's no area underneath to fully explain everything that you do and everything that you look at. You see 5 or 6 words, or how many things can you get in a certain amount of characters written, and unfortunately, we all draw a lot of conclusions. I think this was a really harsh learning curve for tennis, and one of the biggest things for any young player is no one teaches any of these young athletes that, hey, you're going to be in the entertainment world. What you say and what you think and how you believe is going to be at the forefront. So it is a very hard situation to navigate. And tennis learned some very difficult lessons. But like I said, let's not let that overshadow what he did on the tennis court. And
the ironic part of Sandgren getting into trouble over something that he did on social media is the fact that he's actually quite charming and funny and self-effacing in most of his social media postings. This is something he put up last week, comparing the handling of the pandemic to the time that he tried to serve and volley. Quote, halfway to the net, I realized it was a bad idea, so I ran back to the baseline, and then I thought my racket was made of lava, and I hurled it over the fence. That's good funny, right? Paul?
Yeah, and that's him. He's a very quick-witted, smart kid. I mean, he gets it. He understands it. And I think, like you said in those little clips, he is a thinker. He hears a lot of different things. He evaluates a lot of different things. But that also doesn't mean he subscribes to everything he's hearing and evaluating.
A Tennessee volunteer talking about a Tennessee volunteer. But I think the same way Tennys Sandgren has made a nice comeback in sort of his image and in the public eye. Again, he's a great social media follower. Let's not forget, jumping ahead, this is a guy after 2018 who 2 years later got to the Australian Open quarterfinals. So this is a tennis story, no pun intended, that seems to have taken a happier turn from where we were in 2018.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. John, we'll see you a little bit later in the show with Andy Roddick, and we'll see Tennys Sandgren here on the show on Thursday. Here's a look at what's still to come on the show today. We'll have a Tennis Channel Academy lesson on the service stance from Pat Cash. We'll see which tennis stars have skills in the kitchen, plus another installment of Mary in Melbourne going deeper than she's ever gone before. That and much more on the way on TC Live.